My dad left everything to his nurse, until I found the real will hidden in a book. The funeral was quiet. Too quiet for a man like my father. Frank Whitmore had been a man of presence, sharp suits, sharper opinions, and a voice that could fill a courtroom or crush a board meeting. But today, in the chapel lined with lilies and forced condolences, all that was left was silence and a polished mahogany box. I stood next to my mother, Linda, who clutched her handbag like it was the only thing holding her together. Her face was pale and unreadable, but I knew her well enough to recognize the controlled fury behind her polite nods and stiff posture. Carla sat 2 rows ahead. She didn't cry, didn't fidget, dressed in a sleek black dress that looked more like a uniform than mourning attire. She sat with her back straight and her eyes fixed on the casket. People assumed she was just the nurse, the one who'd cared for him through the final months of illness, but the way she carried herself, you'd think she was the widow. I'd only met her twice, once in the hospital hallway, where she'd called me Sean and offered a mechanical smile. The second time, at Dad's house, when she was already reorganizing the kitchen. Now she was front and center at his funeral, and I was already starting to feel like a guest at my own father's farewell. An hour later, we sat in the office of Mr. Aldridge, my father's longtime attorney. The man hadn't aged a day in the past decade, still wearing the same gray 3-piece suit and wireframe glasses. He looked like he'd stepped out of an old law textbook. "Thank you all for coming," he said, folding his hands over the stack of documents in front of him. My mother and I sat across from him. Carla had claimed the chair nearest the window, sunlight outlining her calm expression. "This won't take long," Aldridge said. "Your father updated his will approximately 7 months ago." That already raised a red flag. I sat forward. Wait, 7 months ago? Wasn't he already sick? "Yes," Carla cut in, her voice cool and smooth, but perfectly lucid. I shot her a look. "I wasn't talking to you." She didn't flinch, just turned her gaze back to Aldridge, as if I were nothing more than background noise. Aldridge cleared his throat. According to the document on file, Mr. Whitmore left his entire estate, including the primary residence on Hawthorne Drive, the vintage car collection, the antique furniture, and all financial holdings, to Miss Carla Jennings. I blinked. "What?" Mom stiffened. "Excuse me?" To Carla? I repeated, louder. Aldridge looked up, sympathetic but firm. "That is correct." My chest tightened. There has to be a mistake. My dad wouldn't do that. "He did," Carla said softly, "because he knew who really cared for him." I stood. "You were his nurse. He paid you." She met my glare without blinking, and I stayed with him until the end. When no one else did. "Because you were being paid to." "Shane," Aldridge said quickly, raising a hand. "Let's keep this civil." My mother was trembling beside me, one hand over her mouth. She looked like she was about to vomit. "This isn't happening," I muttered, pacing. "No way he'd cut me out like that. Or her." Carla stood too. She didn't raise her voice. "Your father did what he thought was right." I turned to her, fury rising in my throat. He thought leaving his entire legacy to a stranger was right? Her eyes darkened, but she said nothing. Aldridge sighed. "Unless you wish to contest the will, Mr. Whitmore, this is legally binding." I laughed bitterly. "Yeah, don't worry, I will." Carla smoothed a wrinkle from her dress and looked me dead in the eyes. "He made his choice, Shane. You just weren't part of it." The first thing I noticed was the curtains. They were soft gray now, minimalist, modern, like something out of a catalog. Gone were the heavy maroon drapes my dad had insisted on keeping since the 90s. "Makes the room feel like a study, not a waiting room," he used to say. Now it felt like a waiting room. I stepped into the living room and immediately felt like an intruder. The furniture had been rearranged. His leather recliner, the throne he'd watched football from for 2 decades, was gone, replaced by some sleek Scandinavian thing that looked more uncomfortable than stylish. There were fresh flowers on the table, a yoga mat rolled up in the corner. A scented candle burned on the mantel where Dad's collection of antique lighters used to be. And there she was. Carla, barefoot, dressed in leggings and a loose cardigan, holding a mug like she'd lived here for years. She didn't even flinch when I walked in, just glanced up from her phone and gave me a polite nod. "Shane," she said, "didn't expect you this early. I didn't expect you to redecorate." Her eyes flicked around the room. "I changed the curtains. That's hardly a renovation. I'm sure the ghost of Frank Whitmore would disagree." She ignored the jab. "I needed the space to feel more peaceful." "He would have wanted that." I stepped further into the room, resisting the urge to start tearing things off the walls. This was his house. It still is his house. "Actually," she said calmly, "it's mine now." There it was again, that quiet, composed tone. The kind you'd use on a child or a patient who might start yelling. It infuriated me more than any shouting match could have. I dropped my duffel bag near the stairs and headed toward the study. "I'm staying here tonight." Carla followed. "That room's locked." I paused. "Excuse me?" "The study. I had it locked. It's not for guests." I turned to face her. "Guests? I grew up in this house, and I took care of your father when he was dying in it." There was no anger in her voice, no challenge, just quiet ownership. She said it like a fact, like I was the one out of place. I stared at her for a long moment, then turned and walked away without another word. I took the guest room upstairs, the one Mom used to call the blue room. It still had the old floral wallpaper, and it still smelled like dust and lemon cleaner. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because of grief, not exactly. It was something else, this gnawing sense that something wasn't adding up. Dad and I weren't close in the Hallmark sense, but we weren't estranged. We talked, we argued. We understood each other in that gruff, male, no-hugs kind of way. He might have been distant, but he wasn't cruel. He wouldn't cut me and Mom out of everything. Not without a reason. At around 2 a.m., I crept downstairs. The house was dark, lit only by the glow of a motion-activated nightlight near the baseboard. I walked past the kitchen, where Carla had replaced the old bar stools, and into the den. And suddenly, I was 12 again. There was still a small crack in the baseboard by the fireplace, from where I crashed my bike into it, trying to bring it inside as a surprise. Dad had grounded me, then laughed about it later with a beer in hand. I ran my fingers over the old chess set he used to play alone. The white queen was chipped. I'd done that too, trying to chew on it as a toddler. He never replaced it. None of this felt like hers. This wasn't Carla's world. It was ours. I moved to the bookshelf, now trimmed and dusted, but some of his old hardcovers were still there. I pulled one out at random, The Art of War. Typical. Inside was a faint smell of cigar smoke and time, and suddenly I remembered Dad used to hide things in books. He thought safes were too obvious. "Always check the books," he once told me. "People never read anymore. It's the perfect hiding spot." I smiled at the memory, then frowned. That was years ago. But the way he said it had stuck. The tone, the little smirk, and now, standing there, surrounded by white walls and the echo of new ownership, I felt it again, like he was still trying to tell me something. I put the book back and ran my hand along the shelf, and for the first time since the funeral, I didn't feel angry. I felt like I was missing something, and, whatever it was, I was going to find it. The next morning, Carla was gone. The yoga mat was missing too, as if she'd evaporated into a cloud of peppermint oil and vague self-righteousness. Good. I made myself a bad cup of instant coffee and stood in the living room, staring at the bookshelves like they were a code I needed to crack. Something itched at the back of my brain, a memory, a whisper of something unfinished. Always check the books. It was dumb, maybe even desperate. But at that point, I was ready to believe in signs, omens, or the ghost of Frank Whitmore tapping me on the shoulder with a cigar in hand. I went to his study door again, still locked. But then I remembered the old access panel, a hidden compartment in the baseboard behind the grandfather clock. Dad had shown me once when I was a teenager, proud of his James Bond touch. I'd rolled my eyes then. I was grateful for it now. A press, a click, and the door gave way with a groan. I stepped into the study, and suddenly it felt like stepping back into the past, a place untouched by Carla's lavender-scented updates. Dust floated in streaks of morning light. The air smelled of leather, Wood polish and time. Everything was where he left it. His worn desk chair, the brass lamp, the piles of papers he never truly organized. A framed photo of us fishing, where I was sunburned and miserable, and he was grinning like it was the best day of his life. I moved to the bookshelf behind the desk. My fingers skimmed the spines, and I hesitated when I reached a copy of Moby Dick. Not because Dad loved Melville, he didn't, but because it was the only hardback that leaned slightly forward, like it didn't belong. I pulled it out. It was heavier than it should have been. Inside, tucked between pages 312 and 313, was a cream-colored envelope. No seal, no name. Just folded once, perfectly. I opened it. My breath caught. It was a handwritten will. 2 pages. Signed. Dated. 2 years ago. Long before Carla had entered the picture. Back when Dad still sent me emails in all caps and called me kiddo during Sunday phone calls. The ink was neat, but clearly his. I knew that handwriting better than my own. I, Franklin J. Whitmore, being of sound mind and judgment, hereby declare this to be my last will and testament. I leave the entirety of my estate, including all real property, investments, personal assets and holdings, to my son Shane Whitmore. He has always been my greatest accomplishment, though I may not have said it often. I trust him to carry my name forward with integrity. There was a final signature. Franklin J. Whitmore, and a pen stroke, as if he'd hesitated at the end. I just stood there for a while, staring at the paper. It felt like the floor had shifted under me, like the world had tilted just enough to make sense again. He hadn't betrayed me. He hadn't meant to leave me behind. Carla's will must have been newer, recent, perhaps done when he was already sick and vulnerable. But this was real. This was him. I folded the document carefully and tucked it into my jacket pocket. Then I picked up my phone and dialed Mr. Aldridge. His office looked smaller than I remembered, or maybe I'd grown too large for patience. Mr. Aldridge blinked at the paper in front of him. Lips pursed, fingers steepled in deep thought. "Well," he said, after a long silence, "this is certainly significant. You're telling me—" "It's entirely in his handwriting," he muttered, scanning the second page again. "No witnesses, but under state law, a handwritten will, provided it's signed and dated, can still hold up, especially if it predates the other document. So, what happens now?" He sighed and leaned back. "Well, technically, this could override the will we read earlier. It would require validation in probate court. There'd likely be a challenge, especially from M.S. Jennings, who is the beneficiary of the existing will." "Carla," I said, a sour taste in my mouth. Aldridge raised an eyebrow. "Yes, that young woman. Nurse, wasn't she?" "Sure. Among other things," he looked at me. "Do you believe she knew about this will?" I paused. "Honestly? No. I don't think she even suspects it exists." "Interesting," he murmured. "Very interesting." I crossed my arms. "Do you think she manipulated him?" "I'm not sure. I don't know her well enough to say. But if what you've found is real, and all signs point to yes, then we may be dealing with a very different legal landscape." I nodded slowly. "Then I want to challenge it. I want this on record." He smiled faintly. "You sound more like your father than you realize." I wasn't sure if that was a compliment. I stood to leave, and Aldridge folded the will back into the envelope, tucking it into his briefcase like it was gold. "One more thing," I said at the door. "Yes? Can you find out more about Carla Jennings? Who she is, where she came from? Anything that connects her to my father, beyond the scrubs and the sponge baths?" He looked mildly scandalized but nodded, discreetly, of course. I stepped into the hallway, my jaw tight. Carla wasn't just a nurse. That much I knew now. What I didn't know, yet, was who she really was. But I was going to find out. The kitchen still smelled faintly like cinnamon and lemon polish. It was one of the few places in the house Carla hadn't gotten her hands on, probably because it still bore the fingerprints of someone who mattered more than either of us, Mrs. Herrera. She'd been our housekeeper since I was 6, a tiny woman with sharp eyes and hands that always smelled like lavender soap. She practically raised me when my parents were too busy pretending to be in love. I found her sitting at the table, peeling apples with mechanical precision. Her hair was grayer now, and her back curved a little more. But those eyes? Still sharp enough to slice through walls. I didn't expect to see you here, I said, pouring a glass of water. You're not the only one who comes back when the dead leave messes behind, she replied without looking up. I leaned against the counter. So, you still clean for her? For the house, she said pointedly. Not for her. That made me smile. A little. Do you know her? Carla. She paused, just a fraction too long. That was all I needed. You do, I said. Mrs. Herrera sighed, setting down the peeler. She came around before. Not as a nurse. Not at first. My heart skipped. Before the diagnosis? She nodded. Years before. With her mother. Nice woman. Quiet. I stared. You're telling me Carla and her mom visited this house? Yes, she said simply. When you weren't home. Usually when your mother was out too. And my dad let them in. She looked at me like I'd just asked if fire was hot. They came for lunch sometimes. He kept them out of sight. I stepped back like the floor had tilted under me again. All this time, I muttered. She wasn't just some nurse who got lucky with a will. She's been part of his life for years. Mrs. Herrera picked up an apple and started peeling again. Sometimes the things people hide say more than the things they show. I found Carla in the garden, kneeling in the dirt, planting something with delicate movements. The image would have been peaceful if I hadn't felt like I was about to detonate. Nice day for secrets, I said, stepping into the sunlight. She didn't look up. You always announce your ambushes like that? I walked closer. I talked to Mrs. Herrera. That got her attention. She stood slowly, brushing soil off her gloves. Let me guess. She told you I'm the Antichrist. She told me you and your mother used to visit this house. That my father let you in when no one else was around. Carla's face was calm, but her throat worked like she'd just swallowed glass. Was he cheating on my mom with yours? Carla blinked. Do you really want the answer to that? Yes, I said. I do. She removed her gloves, folded them slowly. A pause stretched between us, filled with birdsong and the hum of summer. He was my father, she said finally. I stared. I'm his daughter, she continued. Voice even. He met my mom before he married yours. She was a nurse back then too. They had something, but he was young, ambitious, scared. He left her. Married someone more suitable, I guess. My mom never pushed. But he always knew. My mouth went dry. So all this time, you knew. I knew who he was. He didn't come around often when I was a kid. A couple of visits, letters, nothing major. But when he got sick, he reached out. Said he wanted to make things right. And making things right meant taking everything from me? Her voice didn't rise, but there was steel behind it. No, it meant acknowledging that I existed, that I mattered. He knew you already had a life. He thought I deserved something too. I rubbed my forehead. You could have just told me. Would it have made a difference? I didn't answer. Because I wasn't sure. I thought about the will in my jacket pocket. The one that said I was the only heir. The one written before she ever re-entered his life. And now this. The half-sister I never knew I had. The woman I'd been so ready to hate. I looked at her. Really looked. Same eyes. Same tilt of the mouth when she was annoyed. Same stubborn chin. How did I not see it? How long were you going to keep lying? I asked. I wasn't lying, she said. I just didn't think I owed you my life story. I laughed bitterly. Well, surprise. It turns out your life story is mine. We stood there, locked in a silence I couldn't name. Grief, maybe. Confusion. Rage. Some new shape of pain that didn't have a label yet. She picked up her gloves again. You want to hate me, Shane. Go ahead. But he made the choices. Not me. I didn't move. Couldn't. Because she was right. He built this mess. And now we were both standing in the wreckage. I took Mom to a cafe she used to hate. Back when I was a teenager, I dragged her here every Saturday because it was the only place with Wi-Fi and strong enough coffee to keep me awake through calculus tutoring. She complained about the pretentious croissants and the obnoxiously curated jazz playlist. Now she stirred her cappuccino in silence, her rings clinking gently against the ceramic. She knew something was coming. I didn't drag her out here for brunch and nostalgia. So, I said, leaning back, you ever plan on telling me I had a sister? She didn't flinch, just took a sip, set the cup down, and sighed. I wondered when you'd find out. That's your answer? What would you like me to say, Shane? I stared at her. Maybe, I'm sorry for lying to you your whole life. That'd be a start. She pursed her lips. I didn't lie. I just didn't tell you everything. I let out a dry laugh. That's called lying by omission, Mom. She gave me a look I hadn't seen in years, the one that used to shut down my teenage arguments in 5 seconds flat. I hated how effective it still was. I found out about Carla when your father and I were about 10 years into our marriage, she said. She was a child then, he told me. Eventually. Said it had happened before we got married, and that he didn't think he'd ever see them again. But then the mother reached out. So you knew. All this time. I knew, she said simply. But I stayed. Why? She shrugged. Because I had you. Because I had a house. Because I didn't want to blow everything up over a mistake made before we even said I do. She wasn't just a mistake, I said. He kept seeing them. Brought them into our house. Had Sunday lunches with them while you were gone. I know. My jaw tightened. And you were okay with that? Her voice was calm but cold. I wasn't okay. But I chose not to destroy your life, just to settle a score. I leaned forward. Don't make this about protecting me. This was about you, about appearances and comfort. That too, she admitted. I won't pretend I was noble. The honesty stunned me more than denial would have. She looked tired, not in the physical sense, but in the soul-deep way that happens when you carry too many half-truths for too long. Did you love him? I asked quietly. She smiled sadly. I did. At first. Then I loved the idea of us. Then I just loved the routine. You learn to live in layers, Shane. You don't peel back the wallpaper if you know the wall underneath is cracked. That's poetic, I muttered. And depressing. She laughed. Just a little. Welcome to adulthood. I sat back, processing it all. The picture was coming into focus now. Messy, crooked, but real. So what now? I asked. You tell me. He left me out of the will, Mom. She arched an eyebrow. Are you sure? I hesitated. I found a handwritten will. Dated 2 years ago. It names me as the sole heir. She didn't look surprised. You knew about that too? I knew he was writing one, she said. He never showed it to me. But he told me he wanted to make things right. I assumed that meant you. Not Carla? She paused, then shook her head. I think he loved her in a way that was more about guilt than affection. She was his mistake, and his redemption all at once. You? You were his legacy. I swallowed hard. You really believe that? I do. We sat in silence for a while. The jazz track had shifted to something mournful and slow, like the cafe was in on the conversation. I hated him for a long time, she said softly. But in the end, I think he hated himself more. Forgiveness is a weird thing, I murmured. She nodded. It is. But holding on to bitterness just turns you into someone else's ghost. We paid the bill, and she insisted on tipping in cash, as always. On the way out, she grabbed my arm. For what it's worth, Shane, you're nothing like him. I gave her a crooked smile. I'm not sure that's true. She squeezed my hand. No, you're better. Back at my car, I sat for a while before turning the engine. The more truth I uncovered, the more tangled everything became. But for the first time since the funeral, I didn't feel entirely alone in it. Everyone had made their choices. Dad, Mom, Carla, even me. Now it was my turn to decide what to do with the truth. Mr. Aldridge's office smelled like old leather and polished wood, same as it had when I was 15, and Dad made me sit there while he rewrote his life insurance policy like a man. Back then, I thought it was all boring adult stuff. Now I knew it was war disguised in paperwork. Carla sat across from me, quiet. Her hair was pulled back neatly, and her hands were clasped in her lap. She hadn't looked at me since I walked in. Mr. Aldridge adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. The handwritten will lay between us on the table, beside the notarized one Carla had presented weeks ago. Well, he said, glancing between us, as we've discussed, the earlier will, the handwritten one Mr. Whitmore concealed, predates the formal document and meets the state requirements for holographic validity. Carla closed her eyes. He never told me. I believe you, I said quietly. That made her look at me. Really look. For once, there was no sharpness in her expression, just exhaustion. I didn't want this to become a legal battle, she said. I didn't come here to take everything from you. But you did. She nodded slowly. I did, because I thought it was all I had left of him. There it was. No pretense. No posturing. Just truth. Aldridge looked between us again. If this proceeds to court, both wills will be reviewed. It's likely the handwritten document will be honored, but it would take time, possibly months. And the process may not be emotionally easy for either party. Carla leaned back in her chair. What do you want, Shane? I studied her. For a moment, I saw the kid she must have been, waiting by the window, hoping he'd show up. And then the woman she'd become, the one who buried him and still didn't know if she'd ever truly had him. I want the workshop, I said. She blinked. What? The one behind the house. His tools. His journals. The space. That was his real legacy to me. She nodded slowly. Okay. What else? We split everything else. The house, the money, the assets, even... Mr. Aldridge raised an eyebrow. That's... generous. I shrugged. He may have lied. But we're the ones who get to stop the cycle. Carla was quiet for a moment. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a small silver locket. She set it gently on the table. My mom gave this to him before I was born. He gave it back to me when he got sick. It has a picture of the three of us, me as a baby. I didn't touch it. It felt too personal. Sacred, even. I want to keep this, she said. That's all I ask. I nodded. Then it's yours. And just like that, the war was over. Later that evening, I walked with Carla through the garden behind the house. The light was soft, golden, and for the first time, I didn't feel like the place belonged to ghosts. He used to sit right there, she said, pointing to the old iron bench. Read the newspaper. Complain about the world like it was a personal insult. I chuckled. Yeah. He was excellent at being outraged by things he couldn't control. We paused in front of the workshop door. She glanced at it, then at me. You really loved him, she said. I did, I said, even when I didn't want to. She nodded. Me too. We stood in silence for a moment. I'm sorry, she added, for how it happened. For all of it. I didn't say it's okay, because it wasn't. But I did say, thank you. For taking care of him. It wasn't a truce carved in stone. But it was something stronger, a choice to let go. As the sun dipped behind the trees, I unlocked the workshop and stepped inside, breathing in the sawdust, the oil, the memory. Finally, it felt like mine. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when I saw her again. The garden was overgrown in the way late summer makes everything wild, vines curling over the old bench, weeds fighting their way between the bricks. I was trimming the rosemary bush when I heard footsteps on the stone path. Carla. She wore jeans and a light sweater, hair tucked behind one ear, like she hadn't come to make a statement, just to see something for herself. I wasn't expecting company, I said, wiping dirt off my hands. She offered a half smile. I knocked. You didn't hear. Guess I was distracted. This bush is trying to take over the county. She stepped closer, looking around. It still smells like him here. I nodded. Some things linger. A pause settled between us, but it wasn't hostile. Just quiet. I just came by to drop off some papers, she said. Title transfers, account access. Mr. Aldridge finalized everything last week. Thanks. She didn't hand me anything. Just set the folder on the patio table. We both stared at the garden like it might offer answers. Do you miss him? She asked suddenly. I thought for a moment. Yes, and no. I miss the version of him I wanted to exist. Not the one I got. She nodded slowly. I don't think I ever had either. I glanced at her. He never came to your birthdays? Not once. I didn't even know you existed. I know. We sat on the edge of the bench, the wood still warm from the sun. I'm still angry, I admitted. Not like before. But it's there. Like a bruise. She looked at her hands. I'm angry too, but I don't know who to be angry at. Him? My mom? Myself? We didn't choose any of this, I said. No. We just got drafted into his secrets. A breeze moved through the leaves. For a while, we didn't say anything. Then she added, I think I wanted him to be my father so badly I accepted scraps. He gave me money. A few afternoons, that locket. But he never gave me what he gave you. Which was? She looked at me. His name. His presence. Even if it came with silence, it was still there. I swallowed. We weren't close. We fought. We drifted. But I thought I was the only one who belonged to him. You weren't, she said. And neither was I. Not completely. I turned to her. Do you think that makes us siblings? Carla gave a small laugh. I think it makes us two people trying to unlearn the same lie. We stayed there, strangers by life, siblings by blood, connected not by memories, but by everything left unsaid. Eventually, she stood. I should go. You can stay for coffee. If you want. She hesitated. Another time. She turned to leave, then paused. You're fixing up the workshop? Yeah, I said. Gonna teach some local kids basic carpentry. Thought it'd be a better use than letting it rot. He would have liked that. The words came to me but stuck in my throat. She nodded. He'd be proud. Even if he never said it. I watched her walk down the path, disappearing behind the hedges, and for once, I didn't feel like I'd lost something. I felt like I'd found a corner of peace. Later that night, I stood in the study again. The same book was on the shelf, Moby Dick, slightly out of place. I pulled it down and slid the old handwritten will back between the pages. No need to keep it on my desk anymore. I put the book on the shelf and lined it up with the others. Neat. Quiet. Home again. My father was a complicated man, maybe even a coward, but he tried, in his final, flawed way, to make things right. And maybe, just maybe, that's how I'll remember him. Not for what he hid, but for what he tried to repair.